On Tuesday, January 22nd, Israelis go to the polls in the next national election that will determine the new Israeli government. Everyone expects Benjamin Netanyahu to continue as Israeli prime minister, putting together the next majority coalition of parties that will amass the requisite number of more than 60 seats in the 120-seat Knesset, the Israeli parliament. But that's only the simple bottom line. There are many more subtleties and complexities to Israeli politics today which most American Jews simply don't understand or have no knowledge of. And so for some analysis and insight, we're most pleased to be joined once again from Jerusalem by Shalom TV's commentator in Israel, Jerusalem Post columnist, whose weekly pieces are also available to you by email and online, Isi Leibler. Isi, thank you so much again for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, Isi, first of all, is there any question in your own mind that Likud will win enough seats and have the greatest chance to form a successful coalition of more than 60 seats in the Knesset so that Netanyahu will be, in fact, asked to form the next government and will remain prime minister?
Look, in politics, anything is possible, but I can only say it would require a political earthquake to prevent him from becoming the prime minister.
On the street, in the street, Isi, how do people feel in Israel about Netanyahu today?
Look, I think there's an overwhelming recognition that he is head and shoulders above anybody else competing for the position of leadership. To that extent, he has the total backing of the people, even people who are politically opposed or don't like him. What is a concern is what sort of a government is going to emerge from all of this, which you've hinted at in your introduction.
Okay, so let's begin discussing this. Experts are predicting, Isi, that the centrist Kadima party, once, with such figures as Ariel Sharon and Isi Leibler and Barak, that Kadima is done, may not even win a seat in this election. What do you expect for Kadima?
I expect that they'll be lucky, and that they may indeed, the latest polls indicate, they may get one candidate back again. Their leader, Mofaz, may get into the Knesset. But as a party, from being the largest party in the Knesset to virtually being eliminated, I think that's quite a historic experience.
Yes, and give me just, 60 seconds on why you think Kadima went from one point being, first of all, at one point they had more seats even than Likud in the Knesset, even though they couldn't form the coalition, and now they're virtually wiped out. What in the world happened, Isi?
I think that the main factor was the leadership. I think two successive leaders seem to exceed anything that's ever been in Parliament in terms of incompetence and bad opposition. And Isi Leibler, who has a lot of qualities and could have played an important role in joining Netanyahu and making dramatic changes internally, decided to go in opposition, which is fine. But it was not an opposition. It was an opposition which was so histrionic and so personalized that people got fed up because she was opposed to everything. When Netanyahu introduced the freeze, she condemned him. When he didn't introduce a freeze, she condemned him. She just went out, and she even went abroad and started bucketing the leader of the country, which is not the thing to be done. Now, Mofaz turned out to be even worse. He came in there and he zigzagged so much that people lost complete confidence in him. And as a party, it was a party built up really to a large extent of people without a long background in politics. Many of them just jumped on board because they saw an opportunity of getting there. It disappeared the same way as it came up.
So if Kadima is done, is there a party, in your opinion, that will occupy this centrist role in the Israeli parliament?
Look, there are three parties that, in my opinion, are occupying a centrist role. And the word centrist is very, very confusing, because I don't believe that a centrist government would to any large extent behave differently than this government has behaved. There can be nuances. There could be incidents where blunders that the Prime Minister made or may have made would have been avoided, or worse blunders or whatever. But by and large, the thrust would have been the same. So when we talk about centrist left and right, yes, there's an extreme left and there's an extreme right. But most of these governments of the centre right and centre left are all the same. Of all the people that have come up, as far as I'm concerned, the one that has most credibility but no experience whatsoever is Yair Lapid, who's running this party and who I think has got quite an amount of support, but certainly has not got the makings of a leader at this stage.
This is Yair Lapid?
Yes.
Okay. And he, in your mind, is, on the one hand, the most capable, but also he does not have, from your perspective, enough popular support. Is that what you're saying?
He does not have enough popular support because there are other parties. He's competing with Tzipi Livni, who I think will go down very, very much more. She may end up with only 6 or 7 seats, but it's very hard to tell because these polls change. But his main competitor is the Labour Party. And the Labour Party started to make a major recovery, but then it stopped and will get about 16 or 18 seats. And she's already announced that she's going to be leading the opposition, which I regret to an extent because I think the Labour Party in a national government would have been a plus.
Now, you just are referring to Shelley Yahimovich,
Yes.
who heads the Labour Party. And what you're saying is Shelley has said under no circumstances will she join a Likud-led coalition, correct?
She said that, and I believe that she'll find it difficult to overcome that statement because she was more adamant than anybody. But politics, anything can happen.
Okay. We
are facing a national crisis, and that may encourage politicians to put aside what I would call their short-term interests and recognize that it's in the national interest for us to be united.
Okay, I want to digress then for one moment. I was going to ask you what the real issues were in this election, and I also want to talk about Yisrael Beitenu as a party, again, a phenomenon of a party losing a certain amount of power in the Israeli Knesset. But let's take your comment for a moment. Why is Israel in crisis at the moment, and that you would characterize it that way?
Because of 3 reasons. The first is we are facing the ultimate situation in relation to Iran. Something is going to happen, and from the Israeli vantage, an Iranian nuclear threat is something that we will find very, very difficult to live with. But we need and hope to have the world supporting us in the objective of stopping this. The second is the Islamic revival that is taking place on all our borders is turned, as I predicted, into a very, very ugly move. It has turned in a very ugly way. It is not a spring. It is not a democracy. It is the worst elements of Islamic fundamentalism coming to the core. Now you have that taking place in Syria, where you have a despot in the current leader, possibly going down, but I fear could be replaced by Al-Qaeda types. Very, very bad, and extreme radicals from all over the Middle East have rushed there to overthrow Assad. You have Morsi, and you have probably seen, I saw even the New York Times made reference to some of his marvelous statements. We've been saying this for a long time. He is an inveterate anti-Semite, he's a bigot, and he stands for the worst features of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's being held back now because he needs desperately to stay afloat financially, and he can't afford to rock the boat too much and lose American support. So to that extent, it's a plus. But you look at Jordan even, it's a very dicey situation. And then on both our borders, we've got Hamas, who only announced after the last conflict that their ultimate objective is a genocidal one. Get rid of the Jews, push them into the sea. And you've got the other maniacs with the Hezbollah also threatening to do all sorts of things when the Iranians tell them to press the button. So we're facing what I would call a tough situation. On the other hand, the Israeli Defense Forces is more equipped to face these threats than any time in its history. And Israelis are confident that that will either deter an outright conflict, or if there is an outright conflict, it will be catastrophic, but we will certainly emerge as the victors. The third factor, which is probably the most telling factor, is the isolation that we face in the world. And I was hoping that with Obama being re-elected and receiving so many votes from the Jewish people in America, I was hoping that the tensions with Netanyahu would be over. And looking at the situation now, I'm quite concerned and fearful, because all the indicators are that he's going back to his old inclinations towards Israel. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, and there's not enough evidence for it yet. But his selection of people, in particular, the selection, and I've got to be very careful here, because what I don't want to do is to become involved in American domestic politics. I'm an Israeli commentator, and I'm just giving you an impression of how Israelis look at it. Israelis are concerned when they see former Senator Hagel being appointed, because he represents everything that is contrary to Israel's interests. He has been consistently negative on all issues affecting Israel. He has talked about containing the Iranians and being against any kind of military action. And to select such a man is, to my mind, either sending a signal to the Iranians or indicating that the president himself is moving in that direction, despite all the undertakings he made. Too early to come to that conclusion, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong, so I'm not making any kind of final statements there. But what did also shock me was you don't talk about your allies the way he speaks about Netanyahu. What he said about Netanyahu on the week before an election was a gross interference in our domestic affairs. And I've heard Americans say, well, this is a payback for Netanyahu. Now, the lie has been told again and again and again. What is in Netanyahu's heart, we all know. I'm sure that he would have preferred to have someone else as the president. But in terms of his personal behavior, Netanyahu was meticulous. He never said anything wrong. He said good things about President Obama before the elections. Yes, when Romney came here, he welcomed, as he would have welcomed anybody. But he has never, ever become involved in American domestic affairs. And for the president to make the sort of remark that he is alleged to have made to the journalist Goldberg, to Jeffrey Goldberg, is not an indicator of good tidings. And I'm hoping again that this is just a glitch and it'll pass. Because to his credit, throughout his whole period, President Obama has been good on the military level. And that is very, very critical for us, and I hope it will remain. But the indicators are that we're going to face a lot of problems, because if we don't have America, the Europeans are ready to jump on us, and it's not going to be easy times for us. So that's why I say it's a time not to have a narrow government, not to have a nationalist government, but to have a national unity government, because all of us can agree on the essentials that we face. This is a time, as I say to my Israelis, and I'm going to write a column about it this week, calling on Israelis to set aside the politics and join in a united manner. Now, there are problems. I would not like to have face Netanyahu's problems, because he's got these contradictory elements. You've got the Haredim, you've got the ultra-Orthodox, which he is committed, or other parties are committed to bringing about changes in that structure. They will threaten to walk out. He doesn't want to be faced with just a centre-left only. To get all of these people to set aside their short-term interests and not be one-dimensional, but to think in the interests of the state, which is going through a crisis that we can overcome if we're united, is something that Netanyahu is obliged to try to put together, and it's not going to be easy. So, as you said in your introduction, the elections we can give or take, we know what the outcome's going to be. Few votes one way or another doesn't matter. But to set together a coalition, I hope he can do it quickly, because it could take a long, long time. And if he's left with a narrow coalition of either the left or the right, to my mind, that would be most unfortunate, because it would lead to a collapse of government and our inability to stand up and show the world that we are united, which we are. bottom line, you look at the people of Israel today, we are more united. We have a consensus. We don't want to rule over Arabs or Palestinians, but we are certainly not going to give away territory knowing that these people are going to use it and send more missiles and are not willing to make peace with us and make further demands on us and try to take us down step by step. We want peace. Netanyahu wants peace. The people on the left want peace. We all want peace. What we need is an Arab leadership that has the capacity and the willingness to make peace. I don't think that our Arab friends, the Palestinians who are supposed to be our partners, and speak with forked tongues. They say one thing when they speak to Western leaders and say another thing to their people. They have not committed themselves to peace, and unfortunately, they talk about a unity with Hamas, which is open about its genocidal objectives.
That was a superb summary analysis. And Isi, if somebody said to me, what are you hoping to do with Shalom TV? One of the things I'm hoping to do is give people throughout the entire Israeli spectrum an opportunity to really present to us a picture of what the Israeli herself feels she's confronting, and you did that beautifully. And at the same time, I want to push you in a couple of areas. Number one, you mentioned the most critical areas confronting the next Israeli government, and you are saying you really hope there is a unity government. And if anybody does not understand what that means, when you hear the phrase in America, Israel wants a unity government, or there is a unity government in Israel, it usually refers to a situation where in the coalition, the majority coalition in the Knesset, there are the two or more dominant parties coming together to share responsibility and power, as opposed to a major party forming the coalition and the second major party being what's called the opposition. A unity government brings the two most powerful parties together to rule the government together. And what Isi is saying here is he would call for at this time a unity government where, for example, Labor and Likud or whoever has the most votes joins together and creates a dominant coalition. But one of the things that I was wondering is, in America, the line that was popularized during the Clinton run for the presidency that James Carville uttered was, it's always about the economy. I think it's the economy stupid. And you did not mention that as one of the issues. And one of the things we've been wondering about is, sometimes the American Jew only sees Israel in terms of its plight, its precarious situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians, fighting the world BDS movement that's trying to undermine Israeli legitimacy, but that there are domestic issues also which drive Israeli life, just as there are domestic issues, mostly economic, that drive American political life. So we understand that one of the biggest problems the last coalition government had was it could not agree on a budget. A year or so ago, we saw this demonstration in Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities where those protesting were protesting what they considered to be the economic inequities of the Israeli system. It had nothing to do for the Israelis in the street who were protesting the issue of peace. In fact, I think you say it well that across the Israeli spectrum, people agree on the peace process. To what extent is this election this time on Tuesday driven at all by economic concerns within the Israeli electorate?
I would say less so than the last election. The only one who's really making a major issue of the social and economic issues is the Labour Party, and that is understandable because that is their base. But I think there is a genuine recognition amongst most Israelis that the real issues facing them today are the external political issues of security and the future. And to that extent, I would say the economic issues will be overcome, and you can find, without great difficulty, some sort of understanding with most parties. The most polarization would be with the Labour Party, and some people, many people, economists, including people on the left, suggest that her economic program would lead us towards bankruptcy and we'd be following the same path as some of the Europeans. I don't think that that's a path we're going to follow. I do think that Netanyahu is aware of certain economic changes that have to take place. There is inequality that has to be overcome at certain levels, and that can be done. But I fear that whatever everybody has said about not increasing taxes, there is going to be some belt tightening after these elections, because we don't want to find ourselves in a situation like the Europeans.
Okay. Come back to a little more political analysis. Yisrael Beitenu, which long characterized itself as a right-wing party dominated by Russian immigrants and led by Avigdor Lieberman, it seems now to be also in disarray. Lieberman resigned after being indicted for fraud. What do you expect for Yisrael Beitenu in this next election?
Look, I think that they may dissolve if the indictments against Lieberman are upheld, because he will go, he's already pledged that he will go out of politics. And if he's gone, that changes the whole spectrum. That's a party which is very much dependent on his personality. They have the Shamir has come in as the number 2 man. He's a dynamic personality, but he's fresh to politics and he's very, very new. I believe that if that happened, the party would kind of melt away. And I think that was possibly one of the factors why they decided to bring it together in case there were problems. That's one of the theories being put forward.
And what about Naftali Bennett, who has created this Jewish Home Party? And you mentioned him when we talked together when you were in New York. But he's seen as, a past leader of the settlement movement. He's very charismatic. And he's changed the image of the party from a sectarian religious Zionist faction to one that courts Jewish Israelis of all stripes. To what extent do you believe he will be successful in this election?
I think he's going to be the biggest winner of all in terms of a party that was on the point of extinction. And the least he'll get, in my opinion, is going to be 11 seats. He could get as much as 15. It's very hard to judge. But he's certainly going to be a force. And the question is whether he is going to be strong enough in a positive sense to bring about the positive changes that are needed on the religious level. Because being a religious Zionist, he's the one that could bring about major changes. Because the chief rabbin has been taken over by the ultra-Orthodox, the rabbinical positions are being taken over, and he represents a party which is Zionist and which is religious and could do good things. On the other hand, he's also got some very strong, hard right-wingers there. And some of us, like myself, hope that the party won't be submerged in right-wing politics, but will concentrate more on national issues and on the religious issues, where there is a dramatic need for a change in this country, and he could bring it about.
By the way, speaking of religious change, I'd love your comment, Izzy, on a letter that Eric Yaffe, the former president of the Reform Movement's congregational arm, the URJ, Eric Yaffe wrote an open letter to Netanyahu pleading with him to use whatever informal pressure he has, whatever informal influence he has, to in some way give credibility to and respect to non-Orthodox movements in Israel, specifically to the Reform movement and the Masorti conservative movement in Israel. And Eric's point was that the state of Israel really needs as much diaspora Jewish support as possible. The overwhelming number of American Jews and diaspora Jews are not Orthodox, and that increasingly non-Orthodox Jews have felt that there is a barrier between the state of Israel and themselves because of the way in which conservative Reform Judaism, non-Orthodox Judaism, is treated in the state of Israel. Would you expect Netanyahu to do anything in this area?
I think he's got such a huge challenge to deal with the question of getting the ultra-Orthodox to go out and work instead of relying on social welfare because their rabbis tell them to learn all day and feed off the state. He's got such a problem to get them to go into the army because he's facing resistance and threats and so on. I really think that the problem of conservative and reform, important though it is to American Jews because of the large numbers of them, is not high on the agenda here.
Okay, so we have to wrap it up, and I know you can't give me any exact prediction. You're also watching to see what happens on Tuesday, but I still want your best sense. What do you imagine will come out of this election on Tuesday, and whom do you believe will join Likud in the coalition government?
Well, I believe that the question is whether Netanyahu can make a deal with Lapid, and you never know, even with Livni, anything is possible under these circumstances, and even with Livni, then I think he could get a broad national government. If that doesn't work, he's only dependent on Lapid, it'll still be a very narrow government, but still better than just a government made up of what I would call the national group and the ultra-Orthodox. Mm-hmm. We must get a broader coalition, but if you're asking me to be a prophet, I can't be. I know what Netanyahu's objectives are. He wants the broadest possible government. He wants to go down in history as the man who ultimately set the foundations for peace, even if he could not achieve it in his lifetime, and it may not be possible with the partners we have. But we want to set up the foundations so that when we do get Arabs who are willing to come to terms and live and coexist with us, we will be able to part from them and have two states, or certainly not rule over them. None of us want to rule over Arabs except a very, very small minority.
Izzy, as always, I love talking to you. Thank you for taking the time late at night in Jerusalem. You always have penetrating things to say. I hope everyone subscribes and receives your column on their own computers by email, or they go online and read you through the Jerusalem Post. But again, I appreciate the fact that you always give me time, and I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. We'll talk again very soon.
All the very best, and thank you.
Thank you. The thoughts of Isi Leibler, Jerusalem Post columnist out of Israel. And as always, we'd love to hear any thoughts or comments you have as you look yourself at the upcoming Israeli elections. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.